Hello and welcome to the UK Arctic Research Station. We're here with Excel Catlin Arctic Live, broadcasting from the Olesen and Svalbard. Great to have you with us, and fantastic to have those schools from Serbia, Colombia, USA, Canada and the Netherlands join us too. Very, very lucky to have Ellie Mackay with us. She is behind the camera at the moment, our wonderful field producer. Very shortly will be joining me for some questions. This is the penultimate session on Excel Catlin Arctic Live this year. We have one more final session in about 2 hours' time. That's an open Q&A and Ask Me Anything session. So look forward to seeing you online then as well. Everything looking okay, Ellie?
Yep, all good.
Fantastic. We'll just get the live chat up.
Welcome back, everybody. Good to see so many people joining us again. It's been fantastic. Some schools have been with us for almost every session, which has been really great to see.
Fantastic. And we have Swan River School from Bigfoot, Montana. Their 5th graders are with us, and as is Miss Blomley's class in Kenya.
Hi, fantastic. I actually know Miss Blomley. She's a fantastic teacher. You're so lucky to have her as your teacher.
Okay. Ellie, we've got stacks of questions coming through that have been submitted in advance. And please do send more questions in on the live chat. But before we do that, can we just find out this field producer thing? What does that involve?
Yes, it's a very broad, all-encompassing kind of title, really. So production work, a producer or director in the film industry is somebody who does everything behind the scenes to make sure that a production goes ahead. So in this case, we've got live broadcasts from a remote part of the world. We've got some difficult conditions here. We've got lots of cables and wires. So there's sort of several elements to my job. One is the technical side. So that's things like making sure all the cameras and the visuals work, the lighting, the sound, the connection to the internet, all the YouTube streaming. But then there's also a fun creative side as well, where I get to film behind the scenes and I get to follow the scientists and interview them, show their work. And for me, that's about creating a story around the science as well as some beautiful visuals of the area, because it's such a unique area here. So it's about bringing to life in lots of different ways with technical expertise, but also kind of a creative storytelling, a bit more artistic side. So it's a nice mix of the two.
Amazing. And why do you think it's important to have a sort of a field producer on the team? And we're here to do science.
Sure.
You know, that we've had fantastic scientists, Katie, Clara and Nick, out on the fjord doing that ocean acidification and plastics work. But we've got the communication side as well. So,
well, it's really critical. Communication is key because there is fantastic science going on here and lots of places all around the world. And scientists are working incredibly hard. Some of them in this type of a polar region are very, very brave explorers, essentially, because they're going out in really harsh conditions and gathering this really vital data. And if that information were to just stay within the scientific community, that would be very useful for the scientists and maybe lawmakers to work with that data, but the general public wouldn't know what was going on. So the role of a science communicator in more general terms is to bridge the gap between all the wonderful academic scientific work that's going on and public understanding of that. Some of the best scientists in the world, and they are fantastic people, and I'm not knocking them, maybe aren't the best people to explain their work, because they're very scientific, they're very detailed, and they're not used to explaining, like your teachers do, explaining brilliantly in a clear, easy way to understand for someone who is not a scientist. So there's a gap in the middle there, and it's a communication bridge. And so for me, it's really important to bring these stories to life and to document and to bring them into classrooms with students such as yourself, so that you can see real life science. The other thing I think is really cool is that this is hopefully more fun than your textbooks. It's very easy to learn something from a textbook. Maybe you just read a sentence or an equation and you have to memorize it. But maybe doesn't mean as much to you as if you've experienced it in real life, or you've experienced it through watching a video or listening to an interview or a podcast or something like that. So it's putting real life context into the science world and bringing that to you guys.
Amazing. Wow, what a wonderful role.
It's great fun.
Well, we're going to switch now to some questions that are coming from the Speak Up English Language School in Serbia. And this is Mr. Lotovic's class. The first question is from Philip. Noticing that you are a drone pilot, how did you become a drone pilot?
That's a great question, Philip, and it's one that a lot of people ask, because we are seeing drones more and more, but people don't realise there's quite a lot that goes into becoming an official drone pilot. So it's very similar to getting either a driving licence or a pilot's licence for a regular plane. There's exams. You have to learn all the theory, you have to understand about flight and wings and lift and a lot of physics to do with how the machinery works. You sort of have to take the drone apart and put it back together again and understand the machinery, but also you need to learn all the air traffic rules, same as a pilot would, and the legal restrictions on where you can and can't fly, as well as safe flying. For me, because I do film with my drone, I then have to think about camera angles and how to get the best shots. And then you have practical exams as well. And if you pass your practical exams, then you are allowed to apply for a license. You also then have to have insurance, which is public liability insurance. So I have £10 million worth of public liability insurance. Yeah, not too much. And then you also have to have permission to fly for each separate flight that you take. So you'd have to apply in advance with a full flight plan and a schedule, risk assessment. It's very, very involved. So the whole process can take quite a long time to become a qualified licensed drone pilot. It's definitely worth it because it's quite fun to do and you get some beautiful shots.
Amazing. Well, that sounds like a very worthwhile but quite challenging qualification to get.
But it's important to make a point that it should be that hard. People say to me, oh, that must be a faff, it must be really annoying to have to go through all this paperwork and exams. But just as you would want someone who's piloting a plane or driving a car, you would want them to have a license and to know what they were doing. Drones, they look fun, they look like a toy, but they're really not a toy. They do have the potential to be quite dangerous if they fly into a flight path or into a flock of birds or something like that. So you do have to take it very seriously. So in a way, I quite like that it's tough to get, because then you know that I know I'm a responsible drone pilot and I can be a role model for other drone pilots, and you know, we all kind of set in the community, all the drone pilots have a standard, you know, respect and rigour for each other's work.
That's great. I'm now going to take a couple of questions from Mr. Garzon's class, and that's at the INEM in Colombia.
Hi.
Anderson would like to know, from your experience, what is the best way to keep warm in the Arctic?
Good question. There's a couple of different ways to keep warm. One is with the clothing and what you're wearing. So lots of layers. I have a really snuggly, soft, natural bamboo base layer, which keeps me toasty warm. I have my nice cashmere gloves and all that sort of thing. Lots and lots of layers, and hats and scarves and gloves and boots. We've actually just filmed a demonstration of putting on all the kit. We'll put that out on our social media, and you can have a look at how much kit you have to wear to keep warm. And the other thing you can do, of course, is get moving. So particularly if you're in a tent, for example, and you're sleeping somewhere that doesn't have heating, like we're lucky to have here, best thing you can do before you jump in your sleeping bag is do 20 star jumps or run around the tent a few times to create some energy, some metabolic heat. Get yourself a bit hot, and then that will heat your sleeping bag up.
Amazing. And Jefferson would like to know, why did we decide to conduct the research in the Arctic and not in the Antarctic? Do you want to take that one?
We can do it together.
Perfect.
I think it's a very good question because, of course, both polar regions are really important for studying the topics that we're looking at, and for looking at the impacts of different types of human activity on the planet. Both poles are early warning signs, early warning areas, because they are affected more by the changes with things like global warming, changes in our atmosphere than perhaps other regions. One of the reasons not to go to the Antarctic is because it's a lot harder to get to. This is actually, we are remote, but it's easier to get to from Europe, certainly. Do you want to?
No, I mean, I think it's the polar regions. I mean, as Ellie was saying, polar regions are very much sort of sentinel systems, these early warning parts of our planet, and the Arctic being one of those. With ocean acidification, one of the topics we're looking at, that's happening faster in the Arctic. And then with microplastics, looking at whether the currents coming past Europe in the Atlantic are bringing those up into the Arctic, and the Arctic is acting as a sink, as a collecting point. And yes, it is very easy to get to, well, very easy. It is a sort of a day's travel from the UK where we're based. So that does make it much easier to conduct research up here. And some research stations in the Antarctic, you're giving months, weeks, months to get there, let alone to conduct your research.
But there is some fantastic research going on down at the South Pole as well, and they're there for a lot longer generally, aren't they?
Now from Duncan Farker, his class. What universities did you go to? I think you may have covered that, but just to goes back to sort of what qualifications you might need.
Sure.
What university did you go to, and what did you study there?
Sure. So to go back to school, I liked lots of different subjects. I was interested in lots of different things, English and geography and all the sciences. And I couldn't really decide what I wanted to do, and it was really tough for me, and I know it is. I used to be a teacher, and it's really tough, I know, when you're 16, 17 years old trying to decide which subject to pick. So I actually went for a broad, it's called a TRIPOS scheme, which is natural sciences at Cambridge, and that meant that I could study lots of different types of science, because I wasn't ready to just pick one. So I studied biology, human physiology, animal behaviour, a bit of chemistry, some maths, geology, geological sciences, volcanoes and earthquakes, a bit of everything, which was really good fun.
Great fun.
And then I later specialised in science communication. So there is actually a degree, it's a master's course in science communication. There are several now around Europe and the US, and that allowed me to specialise in documentary storytelling for video, TV, and for radio as well. So I've done the sort of hardcore science and then more of the science communication. But I will confess to you that you don't need to have either a science degree or a science communication degree to be a science communicator. And there are some fantastic science communicators around who are not qualified science communicators. For me, it was great fun. It was something I wanted to do, and it allowed me to really hone my skills and learn a lot about the craft. But I would say, if you study something that you're passionate about and you enjoy, you will be fine. The world has a way of working itself out, and if you're happy and you're passionate and you're studying something that you enjoy, it won't be difficult for you, it won't be hard. So that's what I would suggest to anyone who was wondering.
Amazing advice, and that's sort of looking at a career in science or whatever it might be. We've got a question from Miss Emsley's class, the 5th grade students. What advice would you give to future scientists?
Future scientists?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a great question. I'd say start by getting outside into the world around you, and that's wherever you are. You don't have to come up to a polar region or go deep into the jungle, even if it's your back garden or your school pond or even in cities. But get outside and start observing and recording things that you see. Because a lot of the basis of science and exploration is all about noticing trends and patterns and changes and thinking about why there are certain trends or patterns. And so having that sort of natural curiosity of why is that shape, or why does this plant appear at this time of year, or why are the petals that colour? So I think asking questions about the things that you see, and the more observant you are, the easier it is to think of those questions. So look up, don't look down at your phones. As you walk around the world, look up and look out and try and have a curiosity and ask a lot of questions. And the other thing I'd say is to watch documentaries.
Okay.
And to try and ask questions of those documentaries. So when you watch a programme about something that's interesting, think if you got to meet the person who studied that subject, what would you ask them? And maybe even write it down so that you've always got your mind full of these questions. Because to me, that's the beginning of a science career, is asking questions.
Amazing. Some great advice there. Do you have any documentary tips? In terms of,
for making?
To watching.
For watching. Oh, there's hundreds. We don't have time. There are some fantastic documentaries for school-age students about the environment, and perhaps we can maybe put some links up or some examples on our social media. There's hundreds of really great documentaries. Depends which topics you're interested in, but yeah, all sorts of things.
Brilliant, thank you. Back to Speak Up English Language School. And Giovanna is wondering what exactly is a science communicator. You covered that a little bit, which is fantastic. Thank you for doing that. And also Anastasia wondering, do you scuba dive to make your material? Maybe not here.
No, it's a bit cold here, although I have done ice diving, and that's in a full dry suit. And that's really cool because if you do it under the ice, you get to a point where you're what's called neutrally buoyant. I don't know if you're a diver, but you are floating, essentially you're weightless. And so you can turn yourself upside down, but you don't feel upside down, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. You can walk on the ice upside down, and then where the hole is that you went in, that sort of looks as though it's on the floor now, because you're upside down. Oh, and wow. You can bend down, put your face in the hole, and it's the world. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's very strange, good fun. But diving, yes, for filming, I normally do a lot of diving in tropical regions. So I've been so lucky to have dived in some of the best diving spots in the world. A good example is Sipadan in northern Borneo. If you do Google images of Sipadan, Sipadan, you'll see why I love it there so much. And yeah, there's some real challenges with filming underwater, but it's a great place to film. One documentary you can watch is Shark Water by Rob Stewart. The second sequel, Shark Water Extinction, is coming out soon. Rob Stewart is a fantastic diver and filmmaker who unfortunately lost his life earlier this year. And he was a passionate advocate for marine biology and particularly saving the sharks. And it will totally change your mind about sharks. So for those who are interested in diving, definitely watch that one.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that tip. Miguel was wondering from Colombia, what kind of organisms might be better adapted to tolerate ocean acidification. We've talked a lot about ocean acidification in the call so far, and that's part of the research that we're doing.
Yeah, so this is a great question. And ocean acidification affects some organisms more than others. So some organisms will suffer from the effects of a more acidic environment, and some actually might either not suffer, they'll be unaffected, or they might even thrive, because if you know about food webs, and there's a good investigation on our YouTube channel about food webs, if one organism is negatively affected, then sometimes the other organisms have more food available for themselves, so they will do better as a result. So the organisms that are most affected are organisms that use calcium carbonate in the water to build their shells or their exoskeletons, so crabs and shellfish. So if they're more affected and struggle to gather enough calcium carbonate, then organisms that aren't reliant on calcium carbonate may find that they've got a bit more sort of space and less competition themselves.
And certainly we're seeing also, I think, that somewhere like this fjord, we've got a change in pH, because we've got that fresh water coming at the far end, and then you've got the sort of less acidic, more basic water coming in from the Atlantic.
Yeah.
So you're finding that species or organisms that spend the time in a wider range of pHs anyway.
Yeah. And this is the case with a lot of animals with change, whether it's temperature or acidity or sunlight levels, whether it's plants and sunlight, for example. Any organism that has a range of environments that it can survive in is going to be more flexible and more tolerant when that conditions change. If you have an organism that can only eat one type of food or can only survive at one particular temperature or particular pH, then as soon as that changes, that organism is going to suffer. So, the more broad variability of the organism can survive in, the better that's going to fare. And we do find that with organisms in coastal areas and estuaries, where there is a change because you get a mix of high and low tide, more or less oxygen, carbon dioxide, that sort of thing, tend to do better.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. The next question is from Daniel in Colombia. He's wondering, when did you begin to worry about environmental issues? I mean, your concern for the environment comes across very clearly.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure. I think I've grown up travelling a lot and seeing places where there was pollution and there were environmental issues from a very young age. And I grew up with parents, a mother who explained the way of the world to me. I think I've always cared about the environment, so I've always been worried about animals going extinct. I remember from a very young age knowing that the elephant, for example, was going extinct. So I remember that from a very young age, but I'd say it's more my high school biology teachers who really brought the conservation issue to life. And then at that same time I was travelling and I was working for a conservation charity in the Caribbean, and that was a real eye-opener for me of actually, the world is in trouble and we need to do something.
Yes.
So I guess I knew about it, very, very young, but as a teenager really worked out, that we need to all act.
Wow. Was there one thing that you think, that a single point you can think back to?
I think for me it was an example with sea turtles in the Caribbean, and I'm sure a lot of young people do associate with this feeling. It just seemed so obvious that the solution was, to change behaviour or do the right thing. And one of the things we're studying is plastics at the moment, and people say, well, just ban plastic bags then, and a lot of young people will have that very straightforward solution. Yeah. And so for me with the sea turtles, it seemed obvious to ban the fishing, long line fishing in the Gulf of Mexico, where there's lots of hooks on the line, they drag it through the water and just collect everything. And to me, I sort of thought, well, that needs to stop. And so we campaigned very, very hard and managed to get lots of rules put in place, so that fishing nets, for example, have to have, they're called turtle excluder devices, little cat flaps, turtle flaps, that in the net, so that small fish still get trapped in the net for fishing, but anything big like a porpoise or a turtle or a dolphin can swim out through the net. And that was something that was a simple change. So it was those moments when I thought, well, there's an obvious solution, let's fight for it, and then it works, and then it's positive, and so then you apply that same logic to the next problem.
Amazing. How amazing. Because this is from Gabriel, sort of almost following on, what strategies can we implement to lessen the impact of plastic on the oceans?
Fantastic. Gabriel, was that?
Yes.
Fantastic question, Gabriel. And it's really the brilliant thing about plastic pollution, that's a strange sentence, but the brilliant thing about plastic pollution, it's something that we can all immediately, very quickly and easily make very small changes in our life that have a big impact. So it's on an individual level, there's lots of things you can do. not using plastic bags, use a canvas, a fabric bag, not using single-use plastic bottles, so get yourself a reusable bottle. I have been gradually going plastic-free.
Okay.
Takes a long time because you can't throw all your plastic stuff away and replace it, because then you're contributing to the problem. You have to wait until things wear out. But I have a wooden toothbrush, I have a wooden comb, all of my toiletries are plastic-free, my clothing is plastic-free. So you can gradually replace items to reduce your plastic use. That's an individual level. Next level up is things like starting maybe an action group at your school to assess, maybe do a plastic audit of your school and speak to your school people in charge at your school of the recycling systems, that kind of thing, and see if you can do something on a school scale. And then the next level up is to write to your political representatives. So, ask your teacher to help you, ask your parents to help you, and find out who represents the area you live in, and can you write to them and ask them, to help you with the plastic situation. And of course, you can write to businesses as well. So, if your favourite coffee shop uses plastic cups, you can write to them and suggest or ask that they switch to reusable, biodegradable cups, or that they sell long-term use cups that you can then buy.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for all those fantastic ideas, and maybe some of the students can think about setting up those plastic action groups in their schools.
That would be great, and do let us know if you've done that, and send some photos through to us if you do set up things like that. It's great to see. It's a really positive, some really positive stories coming out. Some of the work I've been doing in the last year or so with plastics,
yes.
With a charity that I'm a mission director of, we get emails of ocean guardians and beach cleans. It's really good. There's a whole community coming together, so join it, be part of it, definitely.
Wonderful, thank you. We have from Ms. Blomley, who says, "What you are doing, Ellie, is incredible. But do you miss classroom teaching?"
I do, and Mrs. Blomley will know because I used to teach alongside her. I love classroom teaching. I absolutely adore it, and I miss my students terribly. And teaching is great fun. It's very rewarding, and it's lovely to work with young people and for a long period of time and see their development and see them sort of really growing into fantastic young people. So I do miss classroom teaching, very much so, but I feel that I sort of channel that same passion into storytelling in visual and audio on a different type of scale, and reaching multiple schools around the world is rewarding in a different way. But yes, I spend a lot of time going back into classrooms. I do a lot of talks in schools, and I'm always around young people because I think it's really important to speak to young people face to face.
That's fantastic. This is a question from Ewan from St Richard's, who is wondering what you will miss most about this trip.
Oh, good question, Ewan. What will I miss most about this trip? 24-hour sunlight, I think. On a sort of practical level, because I'm quite sensitive to sunlight. I'm one of those people where if it's sunny, I'm full of energy and I'm very happy, and as soon as it's dark, I'm asleep and can't get out of bed in the morning. So I love the fact that the light is beautiful here, and the landscape, the view is stunning. And I'll miss the sort of energy of capturing these moments. We've got a fantastic team. The science team that we have here have been doing amazing work. And it's really exciting actually being there at the moment where they're collecting the samples. And in several months' time, when those results start to be published, it'll be great to say, oh, we were there at the beginning of that. So I'll miss being at the forefront, sort of at the front line, and I'll miss the sunlight.
Wow. Thank you. This a question from Eric coming through. Do you think there is undiscovered life in the Arctic tundra?
Almost certainly, yes. So we're not specifically looking for new species on this trip. There are sometimes zoological researchers who do go out into the jungle or the tundra and the Arctic to try and find new species. But it's it's vast and it's beautiful and it's relatively unexplored. So it's almost certain that there'll be new species, undiscovered species here, and maybe some of you in the future, if you become Arctic researchers, may end up discovering one yourself.
Fantastic, thank you. So we have a question from Cyprus. If there were one thing you could take with you, what would it be from the Arctic?
Oh, from the Arctic?
Yeah.
To take what, like a physical object?
I don't know.
Mean, or a
memory, a physical object, a reindeer antler?
Reindeer antler. Well, I think a physical object it would be the photographs and the videos, because that's a very easy way to be re-immersed back into the memories of the environment. I'd quite like to take. I've made a recording of the sound of just outside the door, because even when it's windy, there's a real peaceful feeling to the Arctic. It's the snow absorbs a lot of sound. And it's so vast and gentle and beautiful. So I think capturing that sound and remembering that sort of sense of peace and beauty and wonder, I think I'd like to take that with me if I could.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. Because we've just got a little sort of, from the sort of poetic to the what kind of drone do you have?
Oh, okay. So I have a few different drones. I fly several different drones on my particular license. So I normally fly a DJI Phantom 3 Professional, which is a 4K. It shoots in 4K, which is very, very high definition. And it's an octocopter, so it's got four blades and a quadcopter. Sorry. 4 blades spinning, but I also fly a Mavic. I fly something called an Inspire, which sounds great, and a Falcon as well. And they're all different types of drones. Because I fly in extreme environments, sometimes I fly with drones that are that withstand high winds better than the regular high street types of drones.
Okay.
And then the other thing is that I do a lot of surveying, either scientific surveying or visual surveys of damage in, for example, disaster zones. So I may fly with a drone that's got specialist sensors and detectors on it to look at, for example, thermal imagery or UV, those sorts of things.
Amazing. It's quite an interesting take on things. Will Manthorpe, he and his class, looking at what is your least favourite experience in the Arctic so far? So you've had a lot of sort of positive ones.
Experience.
Are there any sort of things that haven't gone quite so well?
Not really. We've had the odd technical difficulty with wiring and internet connections and things, but they sort of pale into insignificance really when you think about the positives. And if you get a bit cold and wet, it can be a bit miserable, but then you come indoors and have a cup of tea and a biscuit and it's all right again. I don't think there's anything really, as challenging as it can be sometimes, there's nothing that outweighs the positives and the fun of being here. So
all in all, positive.
All positive. Yeah.
Fantastic. And the second question from Will was, does the water here from the glacier taste better than normal water?
Oh, I think it does. I've got a bit of a thing about glacial water.
Okay.
Yeah, I drank a lot in Canada as well over the summer last year. Yes, partly because it's ice cold. I don't know if you like your water cold or not. And partly because it's got very high mineral content from having been dragged down the mountains and having more sort of salts and so on in it. But it's basically like the freshest, best mineral water on the planet. Do you like glacial water?
I hadn't sort of, yes, I mean, it's great, it's lovely and fresh and cold. I hadn't given it that much thought than that.
It. And of course, you don't need to buy it in a plastic bottle. You can take your metal or bamboo bottle up and then fill up and drink it straight from the source, which is great.
That's fantastic. We've got a couple more questions from Ewan from St Richards. We have a question around training. Did you have to do any special training to get yourself ready for this trip?
Yes, so one of the biggest things that you need to be prepared for out here is polar bears. because we don't have them anywhere else. We don't have them in the UK, certainly. And it is a threat here. Polar bears can be very dangerous, and they do come in even through the town sometimes. So as soon as we arrived, the whole team was put through rifle training and polar bear management training. So obviously the rifle is the absolute last resort. So you have training in terms of how to avoid getting yourself into a situation with a polar bear anyway, how to manage your environment so that you're always aware and you're not going to stumble across a polar bear. If you do come across a polar bear, the best ways to avoid provoking it. Flare guns and sort of guns that send out little explosions just to scare the bear away, a bit like a firework. So we tested all of those. And then of course you do have to have rifle training as a last resort if you do need to, if you are in a dangerous situation. So that was quite fun. It was quite daunting having rifle training, but really good to then get that sense of feeling safer having a rifle with you whenever you go out.
Amazing. And have you ever felt, maybe walking around later in the evening that maybe there might be a polar bear around the next corner?
I have actually, because I've been editing some video footage quite late at night, and my bedroom was in a different building than the studio where we are now. So I'd find myself at 5 o'clock in the morning walking across to get a couple of hours sleep, which means that nobody else on the station is awake. It's the same sunlight as it is now, so it's bright and sunny. But I did have a moment where I was walking and I thought, I'm not sure what I would do now if there was one just around the corner of the building. And you start to be very aware of where the nearest door is. We have in the village here an open door policy, so everybody keeps all of their doors open, which means if a polar bear did wander into town, everybody could just run to the nearest building and get inside. So I have planned where the doors are on my route from the studio to the bedroom. I kind of got a few escape routes. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you had that mentally sorted out, just in case a polar bear wandered through town.
It's the same as if it's dark and you start thinking, you get the heebie-jeebies a little bit. It's not dark here, but when you're walking through the snow and it's all white around you, and you think, well, there could be one somewhere.
There could be one somewhere.
Yeah.
I wanted to go to an interesting question from the students at DPS in India, and that is we've talked at the beginning of this broadcast quite a lot about science communication, and also your love of the sort of creative and the storytelling side of that. Just wanting to understand or know, how do you balance the sort of, I think what one could say is a dry science, factual information with the storytelling and the creativity? That's
a fantastic question. Yeah, and that's one of the things I love most about my job, is the point at which those two things meet, essentially. Because I completely disagree that science is dry and boring, and a lot of people think it is, and it's my job. Literally my job is to try and bring that to life. And it's something that all teachers, science teachers, will understand, that if you can use characters and stories and context, you can bring that science to life so that it's not just words and diagrams. And so for me, I think the two are very blended together anyway. When I was a teacher, I always used stories and characters and metaphors to try and get the concepts across. And I do the same in film. It's a different type of visual creativity. But I think science is full of fantastic stories, and people are full of fantastic stories. Everybody I meet is a character, and everybody has a story to tell. And so as a documentary filmmaker, I think maybe you just have that bit of your brain switched on all the time, and you're more aware of noticing those stories. And when a scientist tells me about their work, I try and pull the story out of it. So to me, they are quite strongly linked.
Fantastic. So I mean, it's great to hear that you don't have to split those two things apart, and that there's common misconception around science that it is this sort of fusty sort of that boring thing. Certainly hasn't felt fusty out here.
Not at all. Because what we're doing out here is exciting and fun, and scientific research is at the edge of discovery. And there are some fantastic moments with people I interview who talk about these eureka moments of things they've discovered, and it's fantastic to capture those. And it's the same as whether it's in sport or music or art. Science is full of stories.
Amazing, thank you. Another question we're looking at here, we may have touched on it before, but sort of what's sort of the hardest thing that you think you faced, maybe on this trip or other trips in the polar regions?
In the polar regions specifically? I think probably it's a boring answer, but sort of logistical issues with getting all the kit up here and making sure the kit works and is clean when it's got some of the salt. I see ice all over your lenses and you have to stay up late cleaning them. Carrying all the gear, because it's very, very heavy and you get quite strong. Getting everything up here, getting set up, it's a bit of an effort to do that, and it's long, very long days. Can be quite challenging, lack of sleep. But they're small things, and they're worth it.
Wow. So a few hurdles and things that make it tough, but I mean, have you found that? I mean, the landscape has sort of disappeared behind it. It's decided to snow again this evening. But can you give our viewers a sense of the landscape here? Yeah,
it's beautiful. It's very ethereal. So by that I mean almost dreamlike. There's lots of different shades of white. There's lots of depth and colour, and there's colours coming out of the greys and the blues in the ice as well. So it really is beautiful. As a photographer, when you're looking through the lens, you start to see, I think you pay attention more to shapes and angles and colours. So a bit like before at the beginning when I talked about being observant, it's another good skill if you want to be a filmmaker or a photographer, so try and look at things in that way. And so I like the buildings, the architecture's brilliant. There's these lovely cosy wooden buildings, they're bright yellow and they've got little chimneys on them, so it's the Scandinavians have a word called koselig, which means sort of cosy, snuggly, and I definitely describe our living quarters as koselig. But yeah, it's you feel quite small in the Arctic, especially when you go out on the boat into the ice fields and you're surrounded by icebergs and your little boat's going through them and they're sailing past. But it's not, you don't feel small in a scary way or in an insignificant way. You feel small in that you're filled with awe for the scale of the beauty around you. So it's quite a nice feeling.
I think we've got time for one last question.
Sure.
And that is, what types of transportation do we have here besides walking?
Yeah, great question. And actually walking when it's really cold and thick snow is probably not the best way to get around. So for all the scientific research we do on land, so if they were looking at glaciers, or we've got some snow scientists here, they will be using skidoos, so that's like a snowmobile, and they can zoom off into the tundra and up onto the glaciers. And we're doing a lot, of course, with the oceans, with acidification and microplastics, so we use a boat and we go out into the fjord and sail that boat around. The boat itself was even going through some slushy sea ice. We tried to get as close as we could to one of the glaciers, and we couldn't actually get up to it because the sea ice is not thick and solid, but it's still difficult for the boat to crush its way through. So that was quite fun because the boat was kind of grinding against the ice a little bit. But yeah, we get around by boat. No huskies here. In some polar regions, certainly in Greenland, I've ridden husky sledge dogs, so that's good as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Ellie, so much for spending the time to take all these questions from around the world, an amazing range of countries and questions, and thank you all for sending those through. It's been really wonderful.
Brilliant questions, guys. Thank you so much. Really great to talk to you.
And I think, unfortunately, that's all we have time for at the moment. I'll just grab that microphone. We do have one more session today, the final session of Arctic Live this year. That is in an hour's time, an hour or so's time, and that is an open Q&A, Ask Me Anything session. So please do join us then. Thank you so much again for sending your questions and for being part of Excel Captain Arctic Live. It's been wonderful having you, and until either the next session or until next year, it's goodbye from the Arctic.